I'm Rod Dowler, by the way, and I'm the chair of the industry forum, and we're doing this in partnership with SAP, which, as you probably all know, is Europe's largest software company. So I was developing this theme that everyone was talking about AI, and nobody knew quite what it was. Then I looked at the panel we got, and I thought, oh hell, that's not going to fly. We actually have assembled some pretty good people, and we also got some good people in the audience, I know, because I've already talked to them. Now, you should. I'm not an expert on AI. You should regard me more as the historical background, because I've been in IT since 1965, if you can believe that, and I've seen most of the developments and quite a lot of hype as well. So I'm going to very quickly go through who we've got today. I'll try and do it in the. We've got Steve Yamm, who is. I'm going to go across this way. Who's the MP for Mansfield and has got a strong background in the life sciences, but is not yet known to us much as a speaker. But that's all to come in the future, because we're very keen to get him to meetings. Then we've got Dr. Chris Francis, who's the Director of Government Affairs at SAP, is a technology, policy and standards expert. Later on, then next after that, we've got trying to do this in order, my good friend James Johns, who is Head of Corporate Affairs at Workday, and Workday is an enormous West Coast-based cloud-based financial and personnel services company. We then have Louise Jones, who's MP for North East Derbyshire, and she formerly worked at I think it's McKinsey Intelligence Limited. She can tell you more about that than I can. So we've got a great team. She and Onwurah gives her apologies. She can't be here to give a talk, but she's going to come for the QA because she doesn't want to miss that. Anyway, AI is a vast subject, and it's not one thing. I think we all realise that now. So what I'm going to do is just ask the panel to focus on one or two applications. I think we've got 4 or 5 minutes for each panel member, and then I'll give some time for questions at the end. I'm going to ask them to focus on 1 or 2 applications, talk about the opportunities and risks that they can foresee. Excuse me. And particularly what the government should do to actually avert the risks or seize the opportunities. And then we can have a discussion. So I might as well go across like this and start with Steve. Would you like to start, Steve?
I'd be delighted to. Thank you very much. And, I think, as already been said, I'm the Member of Parliament for a former mining constituency. I think that's probably what Mansfield is best recognised for, most recognised for. I come from a mining family in the constituency, as it happens, but I've been fortunate enough to spend most of my professional career working as a senior executive, both in the life sciences and in technology, in particular in software aligned with life sciences applications. And I really want to talk about a few of the things that I've been fortunate enough to work on in the last few years, where I've seen real transformational change from the application of both AI and machine learning. And in particular, I think 2 examples which really strike home for me. I joined an Oxford-based company right at the beginning of the pandemic. I'd been a board member for around a year, and I joined them to run their commercial organisation. One of the first customers that we signed was Pfizer, and Pfizer was, of course, highly intent at that time on vaccine development, the assistance that we gave them through applying machine learning to some of the technologies that they were employing in clinical development of vaccine were really transformational pieces for them in terms of being able to not only work very, very quickly and deliver results very quickly. And a lot of that work that we did with Pfizer was a spin-off from some pro bono work that we'd done with UCL on COVID diagnostic applications. But not only did it allow Pfizer to move very, very quickly in terms of moving assets through the clinic, it also allowed them to meet regulatory demand. Of course, pharma and life sciences is already a highly regulated industry. Pfizer had real challenges in meeting that regulation when they were moving rapidly, and it's only through the application of machine learning that they were able to accomplish both that precision in science data, being able to process data hundreds of times more rapidly, but also meet those regulatory requirements at the same time. Pfizer, first example. Second example, Bristol Myers Squibb, so another US pharma company. Those of you who follow the industry know that the fastest growing therapeutic area in the industry is around cell and gene therapy. These are new therapeutics that are, for patients, are absolutely life-changing. They're often single-shot remedy, but they have the potential to make huge changes for many unmet disease types, many of them genetic, of course, in character. Organisations like Bristol Myers Squibb are setting up to manufacture worldwide on these products. They're moving many techniques that they employed in research into things like quality control, and this provides massive challenges to them. Again, regulatory. If you employ technology in research and you want to put it into manufacturing, there's a whole challenge there about how do you make that work in terms of things like record security, sign-off of data, how do you process that data rapidly enough. And so this exact same approach that allowed Pfizer to move assets through the clinic now allows organizations like BMS and Takeda to be able to do things like batch release more effectively, to be able to ship product directly to patients. And so some of these applications are, they make huge differences in terms of delivery to patients. If you think about the Pfizer example, being able to get vaccine product through regulation and delivered to consumers more rapidly. If you think about the BMS example, life-changing therapy delivered reliably and within regulation. These things would not be available, I think, to those organizations without the application of AI, and in particular machine learning to their business process. So my take home from my experience of the last 5 years has been that these technologies are really transformational for business. As we think about how they're regulated, I think we need to also understand that these are already highly regulated industries, and that there is, in fact, the potential for this type of technology to really unlock better adherence with existing regulation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve. And we can move straight on to Dr. Chris Francis.
So, thank you. Firstly, as sponsor, thank you very much to Industry Forum for putting the panel together and SME4Labour for hosting, and of course, our illustrious and highly qualified parliamentarians and colleagues. If you haven't heard about SAP, we do not the exciting stuff, we do the boring stuff. Our birth was big software for big business, but now we're 80% of our customer base is small companies, and about 80% of business-to-business transactions touch an SAP system. I'll give you some idea of the scale. And I wanted to sponsor this event because consumers, citizens have been exposed to something of a wild west with things going public online. People have been using general purpose generative AI for things that are, say, there's a need for a bit of regulator catch-up. If you're using these things for legal advice, medical advice, this is probably not a thing you should be doing without being informed of the risks you are taking. And it's completely different inside most businesses. Our mantra is AI should be relevant, reliable, and responsible. Relevant and reliable should be pretty obvious. It's got to be relevant to what you're doing, and you've got to be able to trust it. I thought to major a little bit more on what we mean by responsible. And I'm talking generically here because we've got something like 300 product lines. AI is embedded across all of these businesses, and we've got something like 100 AI applications. Really interesting stuff like matching purchase orders to invoices, a job that nobody who is qualified to do it wants to do. If you've ever done it, it's really important for cash flow, obviously. It is absolutely vital to keep businesses running, but it's not life sciences, it's not, sorry. What we've done on the responsibility side is we've adopted the UNESCO recommendations into AI. What that means is that's a 10-point plan. We've got an AI ethics committee enforcing that internally to keep us honest. We've got an independent advisory panel, and we've published our AI ethics handbook. And it's actually, I can really recommend it, the SAP AI ethics handbook. And what we've done in that is we've got our red lines. We will not do anything that impacts freedom of the individual, adversely impacts society, or the environment. So that's things like we will not do reverse anonymization, we won't use it for in warfare areas, and we won't do mass surveillance. Those are absolutely in writing, in black and white. We then go into a lot more detail about how we handle things like personal data. These things are already regulated. Same with bias. And nearly everything we do is human in the loop. It always goes up to a human being for sign-off, for accountability, liability, and transparency reasons. Again, some of that is good practice, some of that is by law. Your finance officer is still going to be your finance officer, and he still has to sign things off. A couple of, I think, things that have become talked about probably through the wrong end of the telescope. AI, in most cases, and generative AI is a bit different here. What you're hearing in the Wild West where it spits out training data, most AI, narrow AI, takes in data and comes up with a very simple piece of information. Okay. This is an invoice for lunch of X amount. That's all it does. You can't reverse engineer that output for the input. And for personal data, that means it's anonymizing. So if I'm doing something in HR, like trying to ensure people get advised to do the right training courses that is going to help their career, which is a big thing, that's going to be anonymized. You cannot use that to understand what's going on for somebody else. Security. We couldn't probably run our systems with the security we want without AI today. We put something of the order of 20-odd million transactions through our AI screening processes to detect fraud and error. The other thing we always, I'm sure we will hear about, is bias. One of the great things about an AI system is you can test it in a way that you cannot test a human being. I can show an AI system 100 different variations on a CV. If I do that to a human being, he twigs quite quickly that I'm testing him. The AI, I can test parameter variations. And once I test it, if I do know there's bias, I can fix it. So there is actually another side to that debate. The big policy issues here for me is context of use. All of the AI is often in already regulated areas: finance, legal, telecommunications, procurement, accountancy. All of these things are highly regulated. And what is needed is for the regulators to get up to speed, particularly in the consumer space where there is this bit of Wild West going on. But actually, you cannot do this generically. A simple example. If I use gender to give you an insurance risk, I'm probably breaking the law. If I don't use gender in a medical system, well, I've got long COVID and a vitamin deficiency, and if I don't put my gender in, it tells me I'm pregnant. I'm pretty certain I'm not pregnant. But that does take us into things. You can over-regulate. The risk to innovation and adoption is really real. To give you an example that I think always throws this into harsh light, the first medical AI that beat a panel of experts in diagnosing, it was actually meningitis, but it's the first one that ever achieved this. Would anyone like to guess or know when that first happened? Sorry? 1973. Right? And it was never taken up. The technology behind it became used in knowledge engineering as the default, and it's the MySIN project. Probabilistic, rule-based system, and that was in the time when you could die of meningitis before the diagnostic test came back. So but medical adoption is really only just happening in these timescales. The biggest thing is skills and adoption in the workforce for competition and growth, however. The consumer adoption of technology in the UK has masked the fact that businesses, only about 20-25% of businesses have a digital foundation. And AI is the top of the pyramid. You won't get the benefits if you don't have a digital procurement system, a digital HR system, a digital processes in your business. You cannot just take the top of the pyramid, you've got to build the digital foundation. And that means the skills and adoption are absolutely vital for the UK to be competitive.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I think James can continue the story.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. As Rod says, I work for Workday, and we do, our business is actually very, very similar to Chris's. So we're an American company. We make AI-enabled HR and finance software that runs in the cloud. Our software is used by about 60% of the Fortune 500, about 45% of the FTSE 100, growing number of public sector organizations, and some fast-growing startups as well. If you're in the US, there's a 1 in 4 chance that any job that you applied for would have been processed by a Workday system. Like SAP, we've actually had AI in our products probably getting on for a decade now. Because our systems work in the cloud, and we process, Chris had a statistic on this, I'll bring mine, we process about 625 billion transactions a year, which with our customer permission we can anonymise and then use to train our AI systems, and that allows us to provide a sort of an extra level of richness to the data that customers see. So for example, they can benchmark the level of employee engagement in their organisations against other people in their sector or similar organisations operating elsewhere in the world. I'd like to focus in on a particular use case, which I think is probably quite interesting at an event at the Labour conference. So one of the sort of centerpieces of our AI is a capability we call Skills Cloud. And Skills Cloud basically is the application of a language model to skills data, which is notoriously noisy. So often people describe their skills in different ways. There's lots of synonyms, there's lots of nested skills. If you're an expert in spreadsheets, you may or may not be an expert in Excel, and vice versa. So we built Skills Cloud by taking about 200 million pieces of data which related to skills, job descriptions, CVs, promotion cases, training courses, that kind of stuff. And we built a taxonomy, and then we've applied that to the processes that live inside Workday. So broadly, if you have that kind of capability in your HR tool, for employers, it allows them to be much more agile about how they deploy people to projects. They can tap into new talent pools. It improves agility and diversity in the way that they can manage their workforce. when employees have access to that capability, they can make much more informed decisions about the work that they do. They can plan their careers more effectively. They understand that if they want to move into a different role, they may have to acquire a different set of skills, which they can do either through experience or through training. And generally, it just makes the kind of process of getting the most out of your workforce and your career a much more effective model. Now, that kind of application, where we're taking what's actually quite clean data that lives inside Workday, is very different to the kinds of internet-trained model that Chris has already talked about. And I think one of the things that Rod asked us to discuss was the kind of the regulatory side of this. I think the point that we would make about this is that therefore these applications need to be treated very differently from a regulatory point of view. So like SAP, we're an advocate for sort of smart regulation wherever in the world we're operating, that recognises those different levels of risks, recognises the difference between the roles of a developer of AI systems and the deployer, and also just to kind of complete the picture and kind of give you the confidence about how these systems are typically developed. In our organisation as well, we've established a reputable AI board, a responsible AI board. Sits as part of our legal function. We have a director in charge of that. That controls the way that our product and technology teams are able to build technology using AI. We've documented a set of AI principles which we've published. We create model cards for all of our AI functions which talk about how we trained them, how we've tested them, and we publish those things as well for our customers and our prospects and our users to look at. And we keep these processes under continual review. So internally within Workday, we have a program we call WOW, Workday on Workday. We basically eat our own dog food, so we use our software to manage our business, and we use the AI capabilities that live inside that to run our organisation. So we can tell pretty quickly if any of the AI facilities that we're offering are going awry. And then just to kind of complete the picture, again, like SAP, we've established a set of principles to govern this, and the ones that we use are basically boiled down to four. So we only look at AI applications that amplify human potential. We're not in the business of replacing what people do. It's more about supplementing them. And as part of that, we very much advocate for human in the loop as well. And there's some really interesting design principles that people are now starting to explore around that to make sure that when you have human in the loop in an AI application, the engagement with the decision is a lot more conscious than, do you want to accept cookies? Yes. Second principle we apply is that we want our AI to positively impact society. So we have very strong views on the kinds of AI that are acceptable when you're running human capital management systems. There's lots of people trying to sell, what you might call kind of fringe technology here, making decisions about hiring based on emotional inference from videos of interviews. We don't go in for any of that kind of thing. And like SAP, we don't go in for surveillance either. And then the last two principles are around championing transparency and fairness. I've talked about the level of transparency we give to the processes and the mechanisms for developing AI. But really also, that's about kind of reinforcing our commitment to comply with the existing obligations and legislation we have around transparency, and particularly around data protection and privacy, which don't go away when you're looking at AI, despite what some businesses may think, and actually already provide a very strong regulatory underpinning for the use of AI in business. So we're going to leave it there for that point.
Yeah, that's super, James. Now I'm going to ask Louise Jones to say a few words. I think Louise knows a lot about intelligence services, and so I think most of us are not very familiar with that, so feel free to expand and tell us about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll touch on sort of my background. I spent most of my career in the military, but for 3 years prior to the election in July, where I had the huge honour of being elected as MP for North East Derbyshire, I worked for a tech startup. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the experience that we have there in developing AI technologies, and just some of the pitfalls, the challenges, and the huge opportunities, and again also some of the values as well that I think is really important that we apply. So just a little bit about the company that I worked for. Our primary focus was analysing the impact of large natural disasters for mostly for clients in the insurance industry. So our real focus was using data gathered by satellites, usually somewhere on either radar imagery or electro-optical imagery, but we also use meteorological data, and we also use data gathered by drones and aeroplanes as well as satellites. And what would happen is you'd have a hurricane that goes over the US, and obviously that would cause a lot of damage. And for insurers, they wanted to know as quickly as possible the extent of the damage that they'd be on the hook for, and then they would also need some assistance in claims resolution, and also where to focus loss adjusters, so people on the ground that will go out and check out individual claims. And this is obviously a very, very expensive thing to do. You want to make sure that you've understood your exposure to an event, because under the regulations, you have to put aside how much you think that's going to cost you. As we all know, trying to put aside large sums of money, and we're talking millions here, is an expensive thing to do. So they want to be as accurate as possible, as quickly as possible. And then with claims, what's really important here is if you are somebody who has been affected by a natural disaster which has impacted your home, you want to know that you're going to receive the support from your insurance company as quickly as possible. You know, the golden time period that we were trying to get to was always being able to tell somebody who had been evacuated that their home was damaged before they ever got back to their home and found out themselves. And that means you can get your emergency payments and you can start trying to rebuild the damage that's been done. And it's a really interesting one, because I also want to draw a distinction here between an AI project that is generative, so think about your ChatGPT, or one that's producing imagery or text, and the kind of AI that we were developing, which was object identification, mostly focused on categorizing the different levels of damage to buildings. And what this means is that the challenges that we have is, first of all, making sure you've got good quality data sets. Any of you who are involved with AI know that the algorithm development is the fun part, it's almost the easy part, to be honest. The difficult part is getting a high quality data set that is accurately tagged. And I think this is also an issue one, because a lot of companies in this space will be trying to approach this in a way that they are approaching generative models, which is using data scraped from the internet, which obviously has quite big quality issues. In the reality of it is, to develop AI, it takes a lot of man hours to be able to go through all these images that we had and tag them. And we made sure that we used ex-military imagery analysts so that we had the best quality data that we could find. That is a very long process. The other challenge, of course, is hurricanes are quite rare, thankfully, and so we wouldn't possibly ever have access to a nice data set of millions of images. We're trying to train an AI model off of thousands of images, which brings its own challenges, as those of you who are involved in this will understand. And then just the challenges of being in a small startup trying to develop a model like this is, first off, making sure that we've got access to people with the right skills to do what we know that we want to be able to achieve. I think in this country, the demand far exceeds the number of people who are skilled in this area. And I think that's a huge challenge for Steve and I, is to make sure that our education system is producing people with the skills, not only to meet the coding challenges of AI development now, but also AI development in the future. You know, I think it's very fashionable now to say that developers will be made obsolete by AI in a few years' time, because AI will do all the coding. I think that's very highly unlikely that we'll ever get to that point. Actually, somebody who's going to be able to code now, for sure, will have a Fortune 50 career, being very incredibly useful going forward. But I know from my time in education, and I know from speaking to many young people today, the digital skills don't necessarily take pride and place in the curriculum that I believe that they should do. And that means for a small company, we're competing with the likes of Google, we're competing with the likes of Workday, perhaps, of getting people with the right skills to be able to come in and build the tool. And the reality is that makes it really hard for small companies that have identified a niche in the market. They're able to get a data set together, who've got the contracts to make sure they've got the runway to be able to develop these tools, which obviously do take a lot of time. And that's a real challenge, and I'm sure it's something that's stymieing the growth of the SME sector anyway, for sure. Then I also want to talk about what this tool meant for our customers. And I'm a big believer in AI, big believer in how useful it's going to be, the huge difference it's going to make. But I do believe AI is nothing without the human input as well, in whatever decision chain that you're looking at. We sort of touched on it here as well. AI is fantastic at doing things at scale. After a hurricane, it can take in hundreds of square kilometres of imagery at 30 centimetres a pixel and give us an answer, pretty quickly. The question is whether it was the right answer. And it's really about working with our clients, because I think for those who aren't familiar with AI, they kind of expect AI to be perfect every time. And part of that is because a human analyst can often achieve a really high rate of accuracy. Of course, they'll make mistakes, but they will have a very high rate of accuracy. As soon as you start to bring an AI tool, even if your accuracy rate drops to 90%, suddenly you're going to have a lot of anomalies that your clients are going to pick up. And that means trust in AI tools, certainly that we were finding, is actually quite low. And so we had to really work hard to make sure that people understood the role that we had humans playing in the chain. And we made sure that when we had a pure AI-only product, that it was very clearly labelled, very clearly explained. We were very open about accuracy rate. We would say in the aggregate, if you're looking at the totality of the damage you'd expect, it's going to be very, very accurate. If you're going down to the building level, what you've got to be prepared for is that there is 9 out of 10 buildings will be accurate, but there'll be 1 in 10 buildings that is not. And that meant our clients could start to make that decision themselves about whether or not they were happy to make a business decision off of the product, or whether they needed a human to look at it as well. And then what we would then do is, in slightly slower time, is start to have a human quality controlled product, which meant that an actual human, as I said, we made sure we had military trained battle damage assessors, so they were easily get the best out of even poor imagery, which again AI struggles with, so that actually a client could look at this and say, a human being has looked at this, they've assessed it to the high standard that I'm used to, and I can actually trust it with the product. And we're still when I left them all in the lurch in July, they were still in the process of moving to an AI first approach for some of the decisions that they were making. But as they're moving through, certainly this year's hurricane season, which thankfully we're getting to the end of now, is working with those clients to make sure that they can trust and understand that the product they were working on, what kind of decisions, the weight of these decisions that they could weigh on it. And I think this is something really across all of our experiences that we've worked in. How much can I trust AI to alter all the CVs accurately, the mortality sentiment analysis that I want, and how can I know that there's been a human involved at some point to give me that assessment. And then lastly, I just want to also talk about why AI is relative to somewhere like North East Derbyshire, which is very similar to Mansfield, very close to Mansfield, where we have ex-mining communities. It's a place where people live. It's a wonderful place to live. But it's not necessarily somewhere where we're going to get a fantastic Google DeepMind outpost, which will be able to provide fantastic jobs but I want to make sure that people who are growing up, young people who are growing up in North East Derbyshire.
That's brilliant, Louise. I think we probably better close there. I don't know, Chi, I know you can only stay a couple of minutes. I don't know if you want to say anything. We've just gone through the panel saying about what their experience in AI and what they foresee as developing.
Wow, that's a big subject in itself. So, yeah. I'm Onwurah. I'm the Member of Parliament for Newcastle Central and West, and I've recently been elected to chair the Parliamentary Select Committee on Science, Innovation and Technology. And my background before coming into Parliament in 2010, I spent 20 years working as a chartered engineer in tech, actually in communications technology, but as a hardware and software engineer, etc. So I have a deep background in technology, and I think and I suppose, there's a lot to be said about AI, and I'm sure some of it has already been said. But it's a combination of hope and hype. There's a lot of talk about AI, artificial intelligence, and it's a phrase which is used for many different applications or technologies, one of which, large language models or algorithms. But what I think, what was clear to me in speaking to my colleagues in Parliament as I was campaigning to be the chair of the Select Committee, was that firstly we have a Parliament now which has a lot more experience of technology. We have many fantastic new MPs who bring experience of AI, of life sciences, which in the implications of AI for life sciences, of cyber security, etc. So I think we're much more, we've got a lot more foundation on which to build to raise the level of debate in Parliament on these issues. And the public interest, which is something the Select Committee would be particularly concerned about, the public interest in AI and the implications of AI. So, for example, if you look at just the, some people call this AI, maybe not, but just the implications of the misinformation and the spread of disinformation on social media due to algorithms which drive particular behaviours and companies that profit from them. That obviously was a huge public interest over the summer with the riots in some places in the country. And then if you look at another example, automated, again, call this AI, recruitment and sort of the biases built into that. One of my experience says that if you, unless you build in diversity by design, you will get inequality of outcomes, and that's very true. And in AI, so there are many areas I think which are of interest to the new Parliament, the government, and the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology has already set out how there will be specifically, regulation of some of the large language models which have the biggest sort of influence and impact, and the need for a more general conversation about what the regulatory framework should be. But we're clear that this technology is new technologies benefit from evidence-based, forward-looking regulation in the public interest, and I don't think Labour will not be afraid to put that in place.
Thanks a lot, Chi. I think we've all added a lot to our knowledge of AI this morning. I certainly have. I think Louise has got to leave us now. This is the revolving door of conference. But anyway, thank you, Louise. What we don't know yet is actually precisely what the government is going to do. But what I think we can be confident is now got a lot more expertise in the House of Commons, and so they're going to have some decent advice. We've got 10 more minutes. If any of the MPs have to go, do. But I'd like you to stay 10 minutes if you can, and we'll take perhaps 3 questions, and then get the panel to have the lady there, the gentleman there, and another lady there, in that order. Would you like to go first?
Probably just speak loud enough if that mic's not going to turn on. But it's a shame Louise left. I loved what she talked about in terms of skills. When I was making I worked for SAS for an AI.
Yeah.
Can everyone else hear? Good. So from a skills perspective, I think maths, computer science, data science, the way that it's structured at the moment is turning off girls. And it's turning off some boys too. And data science is a fascinating, interesting area. And Steve talked a little bit about some of the use cases. But there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of them globally. It's a really exciting place to work, and yet we're not getting people excited about it at a young enough age. And I'm interested to hear maybe from Steve or Chi what the plans are to overhaul the education system to entice some people into what can be a life-changing, exciting career.
Brilliant. We've got Jackie Smith coming in to talk about skills. The gentleman there.
Thank you, and Chi, congratulations on your election. We've heard from the panel about over-regulation, under-regulation, and in the previous government, the local council in West London, are trying to drive tech transformation also for local businesses. What we often hear is regulatory uncertainty is the big thing that holds people back, as well as not trying to regulation.
Yes.
Some regulators are on the RCS, some are not. This is preventing them going in. So, how is regulation under Labour going to be different? And how are you and your committee going to improve things for local business so that they know where they stand with tech and what they can and
So we need Goldilocks regulation. Now there's one lady over there.
So I'm from Milton Keynes Central, and I think we have the same issues as in Mansfield and North East Derbyshire around there's a whole raft of people who are digitally divided from the digital economy, but who are being asked to use generative AI to create their CVs and make their job applications, have them apply for the jobs they apply for, which don't need AI capabilities. That's a little bit weird. But I'm interested in the small business side is what are SAP and Workday doing to change that divide, because I think the cost of AI and the carbon footprint of a lot of AI is a serious problem for small businesses as well as for those people disadvantaged in their education.
Yeah, it could be a serious problem for the grid as well, if you look at the projections. Okay, that's brilliant. So we want to cover skills, regulation, digital exclusion, and SMEs. Why don't we deal with the parliamentarians first? We get perhaps Chi and then Steve, and then I don't know if Chris and John, James had any comments on it. Chi.
Great, it was fantastic questions. I'll just start with the regulation because my last proper job, as my constituents call it, before coming into Parliament was as head of technology at Ofcom, and we so I was working for a regulator after having spent 17 years in the private sector and so regulation it can be a barrier to innovation. But the absence of regulation can also be a barrier to innovation, and because of that lack of certainty, which a sort of free for all or a Wild West delivers. And I think one of the things we're seeing with AI particularly is that a lot of regulation or complex regulation can obviously be an advantage to big companies who have lots of lawyers and whole departments that can look at it, and it can be a barrier to smaller companies and more innovative. So getting the regulatory environment right, and that's why I talk about forward-looking regulation, and also why the Labour government has committed to a regulatory innovation office. So that was because one of the new technologies, new applications, the regulatory environment by definition isn't designed to support them because they're new. So the regulatory innovation office would look at how to adapt regulation for emerging technologies, and also to bring together across different departments or different regulatory agencies, so that small businesses in particular, are not having to go to, as I know, having spoken to some, are having to go to 15 different agencies or something in order to understand what their regulatory duties are. But I think regulation can also help drive new markets. Because if there is certainty, if there is understanding of what the requirements are, whether that be on, for example, having a human be part of any algorithmic decision making, which impacts other human beings, when there's that certainty, that can really support the growth of a competitive markets, in particular applications. And just on the skills, and I think young people, we have a huge talent pool, particularly, and I see that in my young colleagues or younger colleagues in Parliament. There's a lot of skills, and a lot of people who have a much more tech savvy and understanding of technology, and having the access and the opportunities, whether that be at work or through further education, as well as obviously higher education, in order to access these fantastic opportunities that the sector, offers, is something that I know Bridget is absolutely focused on.
Thanks, Chi. Steve, do you have any points to make, particularly on medical?
I do, and particularly around this question about opportunities and skills. I think one of the things that we really need to address is what are the technical and vocational entry routes into science. I was very fortunate when I left school, and it's some years ago now, of course, that there was a route to go into science. I don't see that any longer. I think it's closed off. I think you really need to be a graduate, or even you need to have a doctorate to go and do the job that I did when I left school with A-levels. And when I look at kids in my community, they're not all thinking that they want to go and work in the pharmaceutical industry and, I need to go and get my PhD before I go and do that. And so I think, we need to make entry into STEM subjects and entry into industry and that fulfilling career that you can have in science and in tech. We need to make the entry routes much broader than they are today. I think that that's really important. I think T levels are really important in this, and building on what's already been done there. I think I was at, I don't know if it's still running, but David Sainsbury ran a really interesting set of exhibits at the Science Museum that were called, I think it was just called Technicians, but it was really about how do we encourage people to think that actually to be a technician is a fulfilling career across a range of industrial sectors, and that there should be that entry point. And you might want to do a degree or your doctorate at some later point, but there has to be that entry that's broader. And I think maybe it speaks to your point about exclusion, and how do you get people with maybe different degrees of aptitude or ambition at certain parts of their lives to be able to learn those skills and so forth. And then, finally, to turn to this point of regulation, well, look, I think we need to be really careful that the regulation is appropriate. I think, we already talked about the extent to which technologies like AI and machine learning can be transformational in industries that are already highly regulated. I think in a lot of those cases, the last thing those industries need is more regulation. So, often in business, this is not like consumer-facing applications. It is a completely different environment. So there needs to be thinking around, what is an appropriate degree of regulation, use case by use case.
Thank you, Steve. We keep strictly on time here, and I can see we're more or less out of time. I'd like to thank Chi. I'd like to thank the whole panel for what I think has been an amazing session, and I hope it's just sort of whetted your appetite for further future industry forum meetings, where we have a lot of great tech companies like Workday and SAP and others. And in fact, as you probably gathered, the industry forum has a bit of a tech bias at our core. So we would love to see you in the future. Thank you so much, SAP and the others. And I think what we can be confident for is that we haven't answered the questions, but we know we've got some really good potential knowledgeable regulators in the House of Commons. So anyway, thank you for coming, and perhaps we'll thank the team.